Hey, what's up you guys? It's Simon. Welcome back to my channel and welcome back to yet another sporadically uploaded YouTube video. I am so sorry. But so I want to get through this as quickly as possible. Number one, because I've done so many takes of trying to express how I feel about this. And number two, because I feel like I always torture you guys with really long intros instead of just getting into the dang video. But this is really important to me. And I just wanted to mention it before we got into the video. So I just want to say thank you guys for sticking by me during this really chaotic period of the channel amidst all the inconsistency and the crazily spaced uploads and all of that. It really means a lot that you guys have continued to sit down and watch every single video and help grow the channel to the point of now reaching 5,000 subscribers, which is a number that is incomprehensible to me. I am having so much difficulty grasping that and expressing how much that means to me. But in short, it's a lot. It means a lot. So thank you guys. And because I want to thank you guys, I want to do a sort of video celebration back like what I did for 1,000 subscribers. I did a draw this in your style then, and ever since then you guys have been asking for another one. That being said, I've been seeing a lot of drawing your OCs or drawing your subscribers OCs videos going around again, and I thought that I would kind of lean towards that just because a draw this in your style requires a bit of an incentive. Obviously you guys would have to draw something versus a drawing your OCs video would require no extra effort on your part other than being subscribed. But because so many of you did ask for a draw this in your style, I'm a bit undecided. So I decided to leave it up to a poll, have majority rule, and then whoever is the loser of this poll will be for the next milestone, whatever that milestone may be. That being said, it's looking pretty close to 50-50 right now, so I would highly recommend that you guys go and jump on over to the community tab and vote in that poll and maybe make one of them a little bit more of a majority, whichever one that may be. So yeah, thank you for that. I hope you're really excited. Anyways, moving on to the main topic of today's video. So this is technically going to be a two-parter because as you guys have already read from the title, it is a one brush challenge. So I wanted part one to be the brush of my choosing. It's my favorite brush. I use it for I use it for mostly everything. There's literally only like two things in my illustration process that I don't normally use it for, that being for blushing and for some shadowing, usually in the hair, occasionally on the skin, but 9 times out of 10, mostly just the hair. Everything else is this brush, my sketch process, my line art, my flats, my blending, everything else, this singular brush. And then part two being I'm going to take every single brush in my Procreate library, excluding some things like stamps and textures that are going to be virtually impossible to use for a challenge like this, assigning a number to it, and then putting it in a random number generator, and then being forced to use whatever brush I end up with, which is going to be torture for me because again, I use this brush for everything and I could not imagine using anything else. That being said, let us get on to today's video, the brush of my choosing, which is called the Quintessential Thick Pencil Brush. So I got this on Gumroad. It's linked way deep in my community tab. It'll probably be linked in the description of this video, but if you're unavailable to check either of those for whatever reason, if you search Nicole Thick Pencil on Gumroad, you will find it. It's created by Fossil Forager on Twitter. The brush is free, however, you do have an option to tip the creator, which I would highly recommend if you're in a position to do so, because this is such a good brush. It is so well made. It is my be-all, end-all, and if you're in a position to do so, I highly recommend it because I'm sure a lot of work went into this amazing brush. So yeah, if you could do that, do. If not, it's a free brush technically, so if you're just looking for something that's going to be really awesome and hopefully cure all of your brush woes, here you go. Anyways, that being said, so my process. So I'm going to take you guys through my sketch all the way up to my render and completion process. So starting out why I like this for a sketch, I'm also going to kind of lump this in with line art. So if if you see any overlapping points, it's because I kind of have a similar process with my line art, but I'll explain that in a little bit. So for my sketching, I really like this brush just because it's so smooth. It has a low stabilization, which I will touch more on in the line art, but overall it's just very comfortable to sketch with. I think it has kind of like a familiar feeling of like mechanical pencil, particularly on paper, especially if you use the combination that I do, which is the paper-like screen protector or a paper-like alternative, just something with a matte texture that gives kind of that paper-like feel. A fine point nib, regardless of what brand it is, as long as it has that little metal fine point, and then of course, you know, the pencil, the thick pencil brush. All three of those I feel like really just give me the feeling of working traditionally. I would even say, so if I had to assign a vibe to this brush, it kind of reminds me of like being back in school and sketching on like my math homework or a test or something and drawing like, boom, this is the best thing I've drawn all week, and I'm really I adore this, but also I'm mad because this is the best thing I've drawn all week and it's on my math homework, and that makes for a terrible background on Instagram. But yeah, just the feeling of I sketched this thing and it is like just do you ever sketch something and you like fully don't believe that you drew that, even though you sat there and you drew it and then you finished it and you're like, who did that? That was not me. That was not my hand. This was God's hand that drew this illustration. And while I don't think every illustration I make ever in the world is the best thing I've ever made or anyone has ever made, I do still get that feeling of like when you draw something and you're like so pleased with yourself that you're like, oh my God, this is the best thing I've ever made. That's that feeling. Really hard to describe. I've really had trouble doing this voiceover because it's hard to describe or explain why you do certain things that you just do every day without thinking. So if this video is a little chaotic, I apologize, as has every video I've made the last couple of weeks. But yeah, that's virtually why I like to use it for sketching. For line art, however, it is, again, very similar reasons. I'm going to touch more on stabilization in this particular area. So, as you guys might know, if you're a longtime viewer of the channel or way stalking my Instagram way back from like 2017, I am a former Paint Tool SAI user. I used to not do line art. I would do like a sketch layer, set it to multiply, and then merge it down below to my flats and my color, like shading area, and then I would do kind of like a one layer painting kind of thing. But when I moved to Procreate, I did not like it. I didn't like any of the brushes for painting. I will touch more on that in the shading area, but essentially I didn't like it for painting, so I had to switch and kind of change my style up a little bit, and I went for something more cartoonish, more line art, more cell shading kind of thing. However, because I was forced to do line art and I was not used to it, I couldn't find a line art brush that was comfortable for me to use, and I found that many of them had a really high stabilizer, so particularly the ones in the Procreate brush library. I didn't know about Gumroad or anything at this point, so I was just forced to use what was in Procreate's library already initially. And yeah, I wasn't comfortable with any of the brushes. I find high stabilizers to be really annoying. It kind of almost feels like lagging. I know that's technically what it is, but the way the brush goes behind me, I know it's helpful to smooth your edges and stuff like that, but I am one of those naughty artists where I don't make big sweeping strokes. I make little sketchy lines for my line art, and it works for me, and it works for some people. It just depends on how you do it, and you know, making sure that you're keeping things clean, and because I like to do that, brushes with a high stabilizer hate that. Everything's gonna look hairy and fuzzy and gross and bad. So yeah, I really was not liking any of the brushes. I found one that I could kind of use, so I'll pop up an example of what my art looked like then when I was using that brush. Versus now, you guys can see how it looks with the thick pencil. I think things are a lot better now. I have a lot better variation of line width and weight and just shapes in general. There's a lot of curves where there shouldn't be curves in my former illustrations, a lot of sharp edges where there shouldn't be sharp edges, just because, again, a stabilizer. The marks I was making were not the marks that I was making, and I just was not comfortable using them. I hated them, but I eventually got used, air quotes, to that brush, even though I didn't really like my art. And then eventually I stumbled upon Gumroad and I found this brush and I was like, wow, this is perfect. And this is not a flex, but I always get compliments on my line art, particularly on TikTok. If I'm ever doing anything where I show my line art or I'm in the middle of doing line art, somebody's like, oh my god, your lines are so smooth. How do you do that? I don't do that. This brush does that. This brush is a magician. It is so good. it's just very easy to work with, and automatically I went from hating doing line art to line art's one of my favorite parts of the process now. Every time I do line art, I'm boom, so impressed. It's just so comfy and nice. It makes everything look so crisp and good, but it still gives the feeling of a sketch because it has that texture, but it also has kind of that looseness that comes with not making such a refined, big sweeping strokes. So yeah, I really, really like it for line art. However, the one thing that I will mention is the texture, and this doesn't necessarily relate to line art, but actually relates to the next section, which is flats. So it's not horrible for flats, especially if you're one of those people that likes to fill in everything manually rather than using the drop tool. But if you use the drop fill tool, you're gonna have the dreaded white halo effect between the area that you outline and then the area that you drop your color in. So I have a couple of fixes for this. Not all is lost. The first fix being the easiest, which is just color over it. Just color over the lines. There you go, you're done. It's a lot better than having to individually fill in everything if you don't like to do that. So it still gives you the added benefit of the drop tools, just you have to manually fill in some of it. That being said, if you can't stand to do that and you still want to use the drag drop tool, there is one way you can kind of fix it, but it's not always 100% accurate. That being said, here it is. If you drag and drop rather than immediately lifting your Apple Pencil up, keep your pencil on the screen and then slide it left or right, and that will fill in the area more or less. But like I said, it's not always foolproof. Sometimes you can fill it in as much as you possibly can and there will still be a little bit of a white halo. So I have one more fix for that, and that is to just duplicate your layer. Sometimes you only have to duplicate it once, sometimes it might take 5 or 6 times, but just keep duplicating and merging until that layer, that whiteness is gone. Sometimes I use that towards the end of an illustration because I'll realize as I'm doing like the blushing or as I'm putting on the background or something, I'll realize, oh, I didn't fill in this little tiny spot on her nose or something like that. And then it's an easy fix. I just duplicate everything and it fills. The only downside to that is you have to check around the edges of your line art because the brush has a texture. The reason that it fills in is because it's layering that texture and therefore it's bleeding a little bit into the white parts of your illustration. So around the edges and stuff is where it's going to kind of get blurry. So if you do line art, just make sure you do a quick check around all your edges, erase anything you might need to. Other than that, it's not going to mess anything up. It's going to be really nice looking, and you'll quickly eliminate all those little white splotches. So moving on to the next and therefore my favorite part of illustrations, which is shading and blending and coloring, all that fun stuff. So this brush is my savior. Oh my god, I'm going to reiterate once again that I am a former paint tool SAI user. So like I said, when I was a paint tool SAI user, I did one layer illustrated like painting type things. But when I moved to Procreate, I, once again, similarly to line art, did not like any of the brushes in the Procreate library for painting, like the ones in the painting section, the ones in the blending. I think there's a blending section. I didn't like any of the brushes in the base Procreate library, and I didn't understand how to use this smudge tool at first, so that's when I did the cell shading type thing. But after a while, I really missed doing my painting type style, so I started doing some research and eventually I figured out how to use the smudge tool. So for a while I was using the smudge tool with a basic airbrush, which I still tend to use sometimes for like gradients and backgrounds and stuff like that, but mostly I use it for I used it for the face and stuff, which isn't bad. I still was getting kind of that feeling again of painting, but I started to notice that a lot of my illustrations were looking artificial. I wouldn't say my style is like too semi-realistic, but I do like to have kind of elements of semi-realism in my painting, particularly in my rendering style when it comes to certain things, and having things be too flat or too blended just wasn't the vibe that I was going for, and I started to realize that a lot of my paintings were looking too blended or too muddy, and I wanted a little bit more contrast, a little bit more texture, and that was when I had the idea, because at this point I was already sketching and lining with this brush, to pop this brush on my smudge tool. And then I was like, oh my god, why didn't I do this sooner? Because number one, my blends started getting really smooth, but also having a little bit of texture to them that I felt like my illustrations were really missing. When you do digital illustrations, especially if you're planning to do like a really heavily rendered style, it's important to have soft edges, but also sharp, hard edges, which was not something that I was really getting with the smudge tool with the airbrush. Obviously, if I just put, you know, a regular flat brush and then not touched it with the airbrush, I would have had hard edges. But even then, I think having like a really crisp, solid, hard edge can be good, but also isn't really true to life. If you look at a really hard shadow in like a photo, like if you a portrait, you can see that there's hard shadows, but also, you know, your skin has texture. It's gonna be a little fuzzy. Even if it's the harshest shadow you can possibly get, there's gonna be a little bit of an edge to it, and that is why I love this brush. That is why this brush is my be-all end-all, because it adds that little bit of texture to my hard shadows, but also to my soft shadows as well. It just makes things look a little bit more natural, a little less plasticky, a little less uncanny valley. It just creates some of that texture that I think my illustrations were really missing. One thing I do want to say is that throughout the process of this video, I filmed it over the course of a few days, and you might have already noticed, but I forgot to use the brush for the skin. You guys might have caught me. I accidentally used this other brush that I use. It's called the Thin Render Solid brush from Jing Sketch. I don't remember if it was from his free pack or if it was from his like $14 beginner brush pack. It's from one of those, I think. Which is ironic because I remembered to use the thick pencil brush for the hair, which is what I normally use this thin render brush for, but I accidentally used it on the skin, and then I quickly remembered what I was filming, and I went back to that for the hair and the rest of the illustration. So about 70% of this illustration I did do with this brush, but for the skin I did forget, so I'm sorry. If you guys noticed, call me out in the comments. Whoopsies, it's not technically a one brush because I did a no-no and I accidentally used it. But I think it still counts because I used the brush for what I normally don't use it for, which is, like I said, the hair. The reason that I use the Thin Render Solid brush for the hair is because the thick pencil brush is a rectangle, and therefore when it comes to getting a taper to be really sharp and really smooth, it requires a lot of, you know, calculated effort as far as the amount of pressure that I'm using so that I can really get that sharp point, versus the Thin Render Solid is a circle, so getting a taper on a circle brush is so simple. Assuming that it does have a taper in the settings. If it's just meant to be round the whole time, obviously you're gonna struggle, but if it does have a taper to it, then, you know, getting that is much simpler with a circular brush. So yeah, that is what I was concerned about, because when I do feathering, I like it to be a really sharp taper so that I can blend and so that it looks a little bit more natural, like strokes of hair, and especially when it comes to things like flyaways and things like that. But yeah, feathering, flyaways, all that, I usually use the Thin Render Solid, but because this was a one brush, or was supposed to be a one brush challenge, I did use that thick pencil brush, and I'm honestly still really pleased with how it turned out. Like, I honestly, if I was like an outside source and looking at all of my work in comparison to this piece, I would not notice any difference between the hair on this piece and the hair in my last video. I would have no idea that it was a different brush that I used. So yeah, very pleased with it overall. Again, I just want to reiterate that I adore this brush. I strongly believe that you do not need any other brush. Like, if you are overwhelmed by all of the options in a brush library, just download this one. If you don't like texture, this one's not going to be for you, but if you love like a pencil-y kind of thing, this is your baby. This is your new favorite brush, I promise. Please use it. I have a couple of TikToks of me using this brush and also explaining how to download it if you're having trouble. I do know when I initially made a TikTok video explaining why this was my favorite brush ever, I had a lot of people asking how to download it and saying that it wasn't showing up for them. So yeah, maybe check out my TikTok and I'll show you guys how to download that. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching this video, and again, thank you for 5,000 subscribers and supporting me amidst all this chaos. I love you guys so much. Some quick info actually about the illustration that you guys are seeing here. Oh, and also something I forgot to mention. I know I started out this video with a sketch already preemptively, and the reason for that, the reason why I still think it counts apart from me accidentally using the wrong brush when I was rendering, I think it still counts despite starting out with the initial sketch, because for me, I do multiple sketch layers, and the anatomy in this one, you guys saw me flipping the canvas at the beginning. It was a little special, so it required a lot of adjusting, and because I would have had to do multiple sketch layers anyway, I think it still counts as a one brush. But apart from that, I am so pleased with this illustration that it is going to be on a lot of different merch. I just ordered keychains of it that I'm really excited to get. I'm planning on, they're just going to be clear acrylic. However, I might experiment with like doing like a resin glitter dome by myself. I don't know. We'll see. So yeah, that might be a potential option. They're going to be $10, and if I do decide to do a glitter resin thing on them, those are going to be $12. She's also gonna have stickers and potentially buttons. So I got a button maker like 7 months ago that I don't know how to use, which could be a video here in the near future, near with a question mark, because again, sporadic uploads. But yeah, that could be a potential video, but once I figure out how to use it, she'll be a button as well, possibly prints, if I can figure out what to do background wise for her. But yeah, I really love this piece. I'm so thrilled about it, and I really like it. So yeah, last thing that I want to mention is not to forget for you guys to go on over to the poll on the community tab, because again, it's so close to being tied, it's so close to being 50-50, which does not help for decision making. So if there's one you really want to see the be majority, really want to see be the majority, then definitely go and choose one of those. I love you guys. Again, thank you for sticking by me amidst all the chaos. I don't know how so many of you guys are here putting up with this mess, but thank you. I love you guys so much, and I'll see y'all in the next one. Bye.